Hi guys, it's Katia here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today's video is gonna be about propagation in winter. I'm not sure where you're situated at, but here in Europe it got pretty damn cold. So we have -degrees, sun is pretty much non-existent, we have frost, and apparently it's gonna snow next week. So dying inside. And the thing with winter is people usually stop propagating at that point, or at least slow down. There are a few reasons to that. Generally speaking, the success rate in winter is slower than in summer when plants are actively growing. There are a few factors that affect that. First of all, there isn't that much light available. I'm not sure about you, but here sun sets at like 4:30, so majority time of the day there isn't enough light because we have fog and sun doesn't exist, as I mentioned. Another thing that plants struggle during winter is the lower temperatures. So generally speaking, there is a lot of rot happening in the lower temperature zone. So cuttings will rot easily, the roots will take forever to form, and sometimes they might even drop leaves. And this is because if you do not help them out a little bit, they will struggle, and I don't think it's worth taking the risk of cutting your plant if majority of the cuttings will die. But I'm one of the person that is propagating through the winter. I have a pretty stable method and it has pretty success rate. My plants basically don't experience winter and they're rooting well. No complaints whatsoever. So yeah, I'll tell you about my method that I use, and I'll also tell you about other methods. What should you be looking out for? So what you should be opting when propagating in winter is a stable temperature, that it doesn't fluctuate a lot. To opt for at least 20 degrees Celsius or 23 to 24 degrees of media temperature. It is the perfect media temperature for rooting. It can be a bit higher as well. Just beware that and you don't cook your cuttings. Another thing is try to provide them with enough light. As I mentioned, there isn't a lot of sunlight available, generally speaking, and plants just cannot grow if they're not provided with sufficient light, because they cannot make sugars, which are the main factors that drive all the other metabolisms in the plant also growing. Again, the humidity, you should be opting for 50% plus, but here in cuttings there's a workaround, so you don't need to humidify your whole room. If you wish to know more about the factors, these 3 factors that I've mentioned, be sure to check out my winter prep video that I've made. I'll link it up here so you can check it out. Now let's get to propagating in winter. So the first step whenever you're propagating, doesn't matter if you're doing in summer or in spring, to ensure that you have highest success rate as possible, be sure to thoroughly sterilize your equipment. Scissors, knives, whatever you're using, be sure to put some rubbing alcohol on it and wipe it thoroughly. Do not miss out on this step. Even if you're lazy, don't propagate if you're lazy, because if you don't pay attention to this one, all the other steps that come from this can be affected, and as I mentioned, your success rate will be lower. First, we're going to be talking about rooting in water. It is one of the most common propagation methods. It's very simple. I always pop my monsteras in the water because they root so easily, and it's such a stress-free method. You just change the water once per week and refill whenever needed. Rooting in water is problematic because water cools down a lot and it takes a lot of energy to actually warm it up again, which will lead to decreased root growth. There can also be rot happening if temperatures are too low, or your stem might rot. It's just, there's a lot of rot possibilities happening. So I personally would not recommend this method unless you can keep your water propagation somewhere where it's generally warm, given the fact that you provide sufficient humidity and light. Or you can put heating mat underneath it. This way it should keep the water at recommended temperature, which is about 20 degrees Celsius. Next method is propagating in perlite. It is one of my favorite methods to propagate anthuriums or cuttings that are struggling from the beginning. Perlite is an amazing propagation method for very few reasons. First of all, it holds a lot of air pockets. These air pockets are great because they also contain oxygen, and roots will benefit from the oxygen and they will actually grow healthier. Whereas if there isn't oxygen, or there isn't a lot of it, anaerobic microbes, so microbes that are thriving in conditions without oxygen, will start to multiply, and they are also one of the main reasons to cause rot. So this is why in perlite you will rarely get any rot, because it is so well aerated. And another fact is perlite is releasing moisture into those air pockets slowly. So there will be a constant humidity between those air pockets. It will be keeping the roots evenly moist, they won't be soggy, and I have found since it is a constant environment, the plants react to it really well. Then we have rooting in moss. Rooting in moss is my preferred method as well up to this day. I root majority of my cuttings in moss. Moss is great because you can air layer the plant prior to cutting it. And this way, whenever you cut, you already have established root system. So the plants should be growing faster than if you have unrooted cutting. This is what I would recommend you doing if you can, and if you plan to propagate in moss. Similar to perlite, also provides a lot of air pockets. Again, you should be aware that your moss isn't staying too soggy, because then you're creating anaerobic conditions and the rot will occur, which we don't want. So be sure it's staying moist, not too soggy, again not too dry as well, because the plants don't appreciate it. So now we're gonna dive into a little of physics, because I feel like it's important to actually understand why I would recommend rooting in perlite and rooting in moss over to rooting in water. More specifically, we're gonna be talking about specific heat capacity. So this actually refers to how much energy do you need to actually warm up 1 kilogram of substance for 1 degree Celsius or Kelvin. So for the water, you need 1010 joules to warm up 1 kilogram of water per 1 degree, whereas for water you need 4200 joules to warm up 1 kilo of water for 1 degree Celsius. So as you can see, you need a lot more energy to actually warm up water rather than air. So yeah, this is why I would recommend perlite and moss over water, just for this reason. Unless, as I mentioned, you can keep your water at perfectly good 20 degrees or plus Celsius. Now we're gonna be talking about how I root cuttings. I think I have pretty well established method. I'm using a propagation bins that you can get for like 3 or 4 euros in dollar shop. What you will do is you will put a heating mat underneath it. You can have 2 propagation bins on a regular size heating mat, so you can put quite some cuttings in there. On the top you will have grow light mounted, or any source of the light. This setup creates conditions where the temperature doesn't fluctuate a lot, the humidity is staying constantly high, and as I mentioned, they have enough light to actually grow, so plants don't really experience that winter, they don't experience the winter shock. It is a great method. So these are actually imports that I'm rehabbing in the propagation bins that I mentioned. They have been staying here for about 2 weeks and a half, and they have all been developing roots, and they're doing super well considering the fact that we imported basically in winter. This is the first one. This is Anthurium papillilaminum hybrid. It was bought as true poppy, but it's not. Not sure you can see, but it has grown a lot of root, and I think it's just about ready to push out another leaf, so that's very exciting. The other one is my Anthurium magnificum. It was bought as magnificum, however I do believe it's a hybrid. It only has 2 wings on the petioles, so probably not pure. Again, it is super pretty, it's very dark, I like it very much. This is the plant that had the shittiest root out of them all. I had to cut 90% of the root off of this plant because they were rotten or just not healthy, and it has since been producing 2 healthy roots, and that's good news. And for the last, we have one of my perlite propagations, which isn't doing well, not because of the perlite, but because the plant has been struggling for a lot of time. This is my Anthurium ace of spades. As you can see, the leaf is dying. It will most likely, I mean, it's kind of already falling off. I do not have high hopes for this plant because it has been rotting in the middle of stem, it has been rotting on the bottom of stem, and it has been rotting in petioles. So a very extreme rot case there, and the stem is like teeny tiny, so you don't have leafy space to actually cut or clean or do pretty much anything, and there aren't any auxiliary buds left, so I cry. It has been on my wish list for a long time, but guess I'll be searching for another one. They're super hard to find in Europe. Cheers to Ace! So anyways, this is it for this video. I hope it was helpful. If you liked and enjoyed it or learned something new, please give me a like and subscribe because it really helps your girl out. I guess this was it, and I'll see you next time. Bye!